This is a video for Unit 3, Day 5, Section 10.6, the bolded problems. The first problem we have talks about area. The formula for area is length times width. In other words, if I have a rectangle that looks like this, you can see 2 squares here and 3 squares here. That tells me that this side is 2 and this side is 3. 2 times 3 is 6, so the area of this rectangle is 6 squares. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. To do this mathematically, they've given us some measurements. In this case, the measurements of one side is 3/2, and the measurements of the other side is 3/4. To solve this, you have to use your multiplying fraction skills, so we know that we are going to just multiply across the numerators. 3 times 3 is 9, and then we're going to multiply across the denominators. 2 times 4 is 8. Now this was inches and this was inches. Inches times inches will be inches squared. Be very careful when you do these that you also report the units. Many teachers are real sticklers about that, and if you go on into the sciences, you want to make sure that you're reporting distance and not time, for instance. Speaking of time, our next problem involves getting paid. Now, generally speaking, you look at your hours times your rate of pay, and that will give you your gross pay. And in this case, they've given us some figures, and they've told us that this person gets paid $60 an hour, and they work for 40 hours. So to find out what their gross pay is, we're going to multiply those two together. If you're not confident with your multiplying, keep in mind that this is the same as 4 times 10 times 6 times 10. Look at that, there's a common factor, so that's the same as 10 times 4 times 6. And look, 4 times 6 is 24, 10 times 24 is 240, so silly me, that's 100. 10 times 10 is 100, much better work. So 100 times 24 makes $2,400. That's their gross pay. So that's numbers 3 and number 5. Let's look at number 14. Again, when we take out a loan or you loan somebody some money, the first chunk of money you loan or get is called the principal. They charge you a rate of interest or give you a rate of interest, so that's the rate. And that rate goes for a certain amount of time. So I could take out a home loan for, let's say, $100,000 and pay an interest rate of 7% and have a 30-year mortgage. So that's what principal times rate times time will give you the interest. And we talk about that as P for principal, R for rate, T for time gives us I for interest. In this case, the first big amount of money is $2,000. The rate is 6%, which I'm going to write as 6 over 100. And the time is 2.5. I'm sorry, I don't know the time unit. So I'm going to rewrite this as 2,000 times 6 times, I'm going to make this into an improper fraction, so 2 times 2 is 4 plus 1 is 5. Times 5 over 2, and remember that's over 1. So here I'm just going to use my multiplication powers and say 2,000 times 30, 6 times 5 is 30, over 2 times 100 is 200. So that's going to leave me, let's see, that's the same as 200 times 10 times 30 over 200. That makes a 1, so 10 times 30 is 300. That's my answer. So the interest on this loan for 2.5 years will be $300. Again, all I'm doing is multiplying. I multiplied my numerators across. I multiplied my denominators across. I crossed out, made a 1 out of the common factor, and went on from there. The next problem talks about perimeter, which we mentioned. Again, perimeter is the measure around a figure, and I remember that by finding the word rim in perimeter. Perimeter is the measurement around the rim of the figure. So this is a rectangle, so this side and this side are the same, and this side and this side are the same. Perimeter goes all the way around. They've given us some measurements for this. One set of sides is 3/4, the other set of sides is 7/8. In order to find that out, the first thing I'm going to do, remember PEMDAS, is multiply. And remember, this is the same as 2 over 1. I'm going to go across, and I have 6. 1 times 4 is 4. 2 times 7 is 14. 1 times 8 is 8. Now, I can't add these together yet because they have different denominators. This is not a case of family, but it's definitely a case of friends. To get from 4 to 8, I'm going to bump it up by 2. What I do to the bottom, I have to do to the top. So 2 times 6 is 12. 2 times 4 is 8. Plus 14 over 8. That gives us 26 over 8. And 8 goes into 26 3 times, with 2 8s left over, which is the same as 1/4. Again, I just plugged in, I have my formula, it's like a recipe, and I just plugged in the given values to figure that out. So here's the length, here's the length, here's the width, here's the width. I got my fractions by multiplying. I gave them a common denominator and combined like terms. And that means that the perimeter is, now this is not square inches, this is called a linear measurement because it's just a line around. Our next one involves a pretty common formula, the distance formula, and distance equals rate times time. If I go 60 miles an hour for an hour, I'm going to go 60 miles. Now in this particular problem they didn't give you everything. You have to do some figuring out. The first thing they want to know is how much time was spent on the trip. And the person left the house at 2:30 p.m. and arrived at her destination at 6:30 p.m. The difference between 6:30 and 2:30, again the difference, would be 4 hours. So time equals 4. They gave us that she was driving an average of 55 miles per hour. So I'm going to do that by 4. 4 times 55, so that's 220 hours times miles. This is just a little trick in here because I'm going across, right? And here's 1 hour. And what's really cool about this is that that cancels out and leaves me with the fact that her distance was 220 miles. This is one of these where you're going to have to use your brain and check for reasonableness to make sure that when they say, how far did you go, that you don't answer, I went 5 hours. No, you went 5 miles. Be careful that you're paying attention with that. Finally, we're going to go back and do a little practicing. Remember, this is the variable, and it's like a stand-in. I don't know who this is going to be until they tell me. So in this particular case, they're saying, today the part of x will be played by -1/3. So I'm going to put this in instead. 3 times -1/3 minus 2. And again, you're multiplying fractions. Watch your signs. 3 times -1 is -3. 1 times 3 is 3. I want to point out something here that I want to make sure. If this is negative, you only give the negative to one or the other, not to both. So here I gave it to the 1. It doesn't matter, it'll end up the same anyway, because negative 3 divided by 3 is negative 1. I'm going to bring down my negative 2, so negative 1 plus negative 2 equals negative 3. Here's the same idea, and how nice of them, they gave us the same stand-in. Now this particular problem has two variables, an x and a y variable. We're only going to use this one to plug it in, and then it's going to let us solve to figure out what x is. So they gave us this, so I'm going to rewrite it and plug it in. 4x plus 3 times negative 1/3 equals 12. So we're going to do our math. 4x plus 3 times negative 1 is negative 3. And remember, that's the same as over 1. So 1 times 3 is 3 equals 12. 4x plus negative 1 equals 12. I'm going to add the opposite, plus 1 plus 1. $4x equals 13. Divide the 4 across. X equals 13/4. Not the prettiest answer, but once in a while they give us one like that to keep us on our toes. And that's the end of 10.6, the bolded problems, and stay tuned for Unit 4.